Hello, welcome to the February 7th, 2023 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the live stream. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America as a product specialist, primarily focusing on Steinberg products. And we are the United States distributor of Steinberg. And I'm presenting from outside of Washington, D.C. area in the United States in Alexandria, Virginia. If you are watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can submit questions in advance by email to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or simply ask live in the chat field what your particular questions are, and we'll try to do our best to catch up with all the questions and go through chronologically to get your questions answered. When asking questions, if you could specify which version of Cubase that you're using, whether it's Cubase, Cubase LE, Cubase AI, Elements, Artist, or Pro, or other Steinberg programs, which version number that you're using. And if you're running on Mac or PC, that information will be helpful. If you don't see an immediate response to your particular question, feel free to, if we could try to avoid asking the same question over and over again, because that just kind of slows down the whole process. So if we could try to avoid that, and if you see maybe if I accidentally, if you saw the question before, answered in a question after, and if I skipped it, you can feel free to ask if for some reason I had accidentally skipped it. So just a quick heads up with that. All right, and so all of the topics covered in today's live stream will be indexed with timestamps and pinned to the top of the video, so you could watch it afterward. You can immediately jump to particular topics or questions. If you want to search for questions that have been asked in previous live streams, you could go to Club Cubase you could go to the cubaseindex.com, and it's a wonderful resource that Jan in Stockholm has created for us. So we want to give a special thanks to Jan. We also have two people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They're just doing it to make it a better community, and we appreciate everything that they do to help people and make it a better community. One other place that's a wonderful resource for the community is the Cubase Nation Discord, and Jazz Dude does a lot of work with that, so we want to give a special thanks to him again for creating such a wonderful environment for Steinberg users to learn. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. So let's look. All right, so I saw that we had a question before on if it is possible to access two different Steinberg accounts at the same time under the new licensing system. And I think this scenario was one person had Cubase and maybe their friend had SpectralLayers and Wavelab. And in previous times with the USB-E licenser, they would just physically move the USB-E licenser back and forth. So there's no way that I know of to run two accounts simultaneously. So when you log into your particular account, you have access to your particular licenses. But it's not intended necessarily to run multiple accounts and to kind of share licenses at the same time with other people. So it's going to be kind of a bit of a different paradigm, but if you had a USB-E licenser, your friend would take that with them, and that was where the licenses were stored. So there's some advantages, a lot of disadvantages with that. But currently, you're only able to access whatever licenses are in the current account that you're logged into. All right. Okay, so we see question from Walter Till. Hi, Greg. Reminder question. Is it possible to make a project logical editor macro to select all markers from the cursor to the end? Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we could create that. So I'll just create some markers here. I'll just go duplicate. We'll see if we need to do it on more than one marker track. We'll see if we can do it. So let's say we will go ahead and I'll just add another marker track here. Okay. Okay, so now we have markers. Let's say if we want to do it on the current marker track. So let's say if we go to our project logical editor, so we want to select markers beyond the project cursor. So let me just go ahead and remove. So we want to choose select in our actions, and then we will say we're going to select markers, and let's see if we could do it. Select markers, and let's see if we can do our position is beyond cursor. So right now, if I come over here, let's hit apply. So we could select all of the markers on multiple tracks. Now, if we only wanted it on a selected track, all we have to do is say, so we'll insert and we'll say the property is set to is selected. So now when I do this and I have my cursor here, I'll run. We'll see all of the markers beyond on just the selected track if I did it right. Let me see if I change the polling condition. Okay, so we may have to set the track, but if you wanted to, again, just come here and let me know if that works for you. So we could just say select all markers beyond the cursor. So let's say if I come here again, we'll see that these markers aren't selected and those particular markers are. So let me know if that is helpful for you, Walter. All right, so we see Peter from Montreal. He's in the theater currently watching Avatar 2, and so he's going to catch up on the live stream later. So thanks for letting us know. I'm sure after your frigid weather, going outside is nice. All right, so we have Andy Gray checking in from Ludlow, UK. Uno Memento checking in from Finland. He says his choice is a live stream. We have Robbie Bowling from Dallas. All right, so Andy Gray asks, hey, Greg, is there any way to recall your external instrument inputs in audio connections after you disconnected your laptop from your ID unit to work remotely? I reconnect and all inputs lost. So the one thing, and I haven't tried this, but I think the one thing that you might be able to do is once you have an external instrument configured is to come over here. So let's say, okay, I want this to be stored as a favorite. So let's see if, so I have that kind of recalled. So let's say now I want it to come over here to, so it's not connected. So see if you could come over here and just, so as soon as we just say, okay, let's click on favorites. So I would try to see if you could maybe save it as a favorite, because I think you could then recall a particular, let me just remove the external instrument. So maybe just because I don't have, so let's say I have my Tyros, and let's say if I come, So I'm going to right click, add to favorites. So play around and see if you add it as a favorite, if that does the trick. But I'll make sure to kind of bring that up. I've always been asking for a way just to save presets so that when you do switch IOs, you don't run into that situation, Andy. Sorry about that, but try using a favorite and see if that helps. All right, wonderful to see Jan from Cubase Index and Jazz Dude on, and John Costigan from Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, so we see from Dallas LaRue, he asks, can you explain in the VariAudio / hit points how the slices and groove works? So I don't think that, you know, if we're in VariAudio that we actually see, let me just come over to where we could have, so if I'm on this particular track and let's go into VariAudio. Okay. So I don't know if, you know, if VariAudio is actually working with slices. I mean, so as VariAudio comes over here, we could see that it is going to, you know, create segments. Now, if we wanted to, like, if we felt that this should be one segment instead of two, or maybe the vibrato, if we wanted to kind of blow that up, so let's say we'll kind of zoom in, and if I intended, or maybe we had a wide vibrato, I could, if I go to the bottom, we could now just kind of join the different segments together. So as we come over here, so if you get to the right bottom, and then you could join, you know, if you intend that to be kind of one particular word, you could do that right there. And let's say, and if it's something that's like more rhythmic, let's say more kind of like a drum loop, and I wanted to double click on it, and let's get to our hit points that, you know, we could see. I'll just scroll back here so we could see our available hit points laid out for us directly here, but it doesn't necessarily carry over, and just make sure, and how the slices and groove work. So, you know, if I wanted to adjust my threshold here, I could now, when we see under the create tab, and this is under hit points, we'll see a create button that we could expose. So if I wanted to split based on those particular hit points, I could just come over here and create slices. So now when we look at it, we could just see that we're going to have sliced audio, and that will convert it into a particular audio part where all the different slices are there. And if we wanted to, instead of slicing it, you know, we could double click, go into sample editor, and we could say, let's create a groove. So now that we create a groove, we'll come over here to our quantize preset, and now we could see the particular groove from that audio file. So let me know if that helps, Dallas LaRue. All right, we have Stefan from Sweden. We had Soren from Sweden as well. Thanks for joining us. All right, and Benny from Sweden, thanks for being on. Okay, so we see a question from Bjorn. Hi, Greg. I made a Mixdown with around minus 5 dB, and when I load it into a new blank project, it is about minus 8 dB, not in the original project. Okay. So I'm not sure if, when we do this, let's say if, when we're doing, so let's say if we do a mix down, so let's say if we have just like a test tone here on a particular file. All right, so let's say we have just a test tone and we look at in the mix console that this is going to be at roughly minus 15 dB. So, one thing to be aware of is if you do a mix down in the project and your master fader is down, that is going to, sorry about that will attenuate. So if your master fader in this project is set to, if you have like, minus 12, let's say you have minus 5 dB on your track, and then when you look at it here, that it is, and you export it, and then it's minus 8, it could be that it's going to actually incorporate the master fader. Also, let me know if you're determining the volume by the meter or if you're determining the volume via the like audio statistics. So if I go to my audio menu and let's go to statistics, we could actually just do a quick analysis and say, okay, we're at minus 12 dB on this particular file. So we could see so if you're determining the level that way. One other thing that it could be is if you go to the project setup, if there are different pan laws, especially if it's a stereo track. So see if you adjust the stereo pan law, if that can make a difference as well, if it's exactly 3 dB off. So let me know. All right. So you see, hey, Greg, hope you're doing well. What are some of your favorite ways to use the automation panel? Thank you. So when I use the automation panel, which could be accessed just by hitting F6, always one function key off on my Mac. So, some of the things that I like to do is if you go to the settings, being able to, show data on tracks. So if I now open up, a lot of people sometimes, I get this question is like, oh, I don't like the Cubase automation lanes because I can't really automate precisely over the event. So at this point, if I just say, okay, let's show all volume automation. So if I want to take every track and show the volume automation, now that we have, if I wanted to draw in automation on a particular track, so let's say this, I would get kind of the actual waveform kind of superimposed in the automation track, so I could be incredibly precise and just say, okay, I need that automation point here, I need that to go and see it in relation to the waveform. But if that function isn't turned on, then at that point it can be harder to visualize with waveforms. So being able to toggle that on, I like being able to hide all my automation or show all my panning, show all my dynamics, show all the sends, show all the volume. Those are some things that I tend to use a lot. We could switch the automation type here, but often just kind of being able to show particular types of automation and being able to toggle back and forth when you want to see the data on the tracks, I find it really helpful. And those are things that I often go to the automation panel for myself. So, and other people may go there for other reasons. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters on the live stream. All right, and we see from Bjorn Wegner, thanks for keeping this channel alive, always helpful here, so you're welcome. All right, and we have Jovanovic 3D checking in from Slovenia. All right, so Mike Weiser asked, can you explain the headphones tab in detail in the control room? Does it share the same output mix as main out? And would I set this up to hear sound in VariAudio playback? So the VariAudio can be routed through the control room. The intention of the phones is to have, like, let's say you're in the control room and you quickly wanted to grab headphones and monitor with headphones for maybe like a critical edit. Or let's say people are just, you're trying to do editing and mixing and people are just talking behind you or something. So when we go to the studio audio connections and go to the control room, you can right click to add your 4 monitor channels, but also a phones channel. So this could be a completely separate output, and this could feed, so it is an independent output. A lot of audio interfaces will couple, stereo outs 1 and 2 of the audio interface. So many interfaces will couple that with the headphone outs. But here you could say, okay, I want to listen to my mix, let's say the mix we have here in the control room, but I quickly wanted to audition the cue mixes that the musicians are hearing, but only in the headphones. So I could put the headphones on, and now I could still hear this in the main mix room, and I could listen to the headphones independently. So, but, many audio interfaces by default will, couple the main output to the headphones. But if you needed an independent, routing, you could use the headphones directly here in the control room. So it's really intended to work in conjunction with monitors, where sometimes you just may want to quickly check something on headphones. You could just do that and say, okay, everyone's mixing here, and I'm just, and maybe I'm the assistant and I'm just checking the different cue mixes for the artist. And at this point, we could just have the artist and only, tweak the cue mixes directly directly on the headphones without affecting the engineer mixing here. So it is independent. And with that, we could also, some of the other benefits, if you had a headphone monitoring system, you could have the headphone plug in on the phone's channel and not have it affect the speakers going out of your main mix if you just simply put it in the insert of the phone's channel as opposed to your monitor speakers. All right, so we have Kinsai from Northeast India. Thanks for joining us. And Razel from Denmark. Glad you could make it. And Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, California, which is close to our office. We have a lot of people from Yamaha in America who live in Mission Viejo. All right, so we see Robbie Bowling says, I saw an article that said Cubase was having issues with the latest versions of Intel CPUs. Was wondering, because I've given the thought about upgrading. I'm okay for now, but for others, who knows? So there are hybrid CPUs where they're, I think basically where some CPU cores are running at a different clock speed than other CPU cores. It's kind of an annoying trend. And basically the operating systems, and we see this on Windows, but the Windows operating system doesn't actually scale correctly with the 2 different CPU core speeds. So with that creates issues. So, it's not necessarily a Steinberg issue. It's really a Microsoft and Intel issue. So I know that they're doing research on it to see if, we have to, do a lot of rewriting in the code to accommodate the 2 different clock speeds, or if or if it's just going to be handled at the operating system level, which I don't think it currently is. So that's more the issue, and it's again an issue for every company because the operating system is not scaling. All right, so from Bjorn, it says, I would like to create a 9-hour steady wind soundscape with Padshop. What is the right setting to avoid a sound that fade in, fade out? What is the right setting to avoid a sound that fade in, fade out like an ocean wave? Big thanks. So one of the things that you could do is just load in kind of a huge sample, and the longer the sample that you actually have, I think that will give you kind of more variations. I'm not a Padshop expert, but Gary Gibbons, if you watch his tutorials, he's like scary amazing with it. But being that you could just kind of load in any particular sound in Padshop, and you may have some repetitions over 9 hours, but let's say I'll just kind of go over here. But as let's say and as you kind of will play in to the different, just switch this to, play around with like some of the different speeds. But and once, let's say you create, just a variation for a couple of minutes, just drop that particular sample, drop a longer sample into Padshop. And then you're able to kind of manipulate it, just taking whatever sounds you have, take longer samples and drag and drop it in. And then you can get a lot of wonderful kind of musical variations with that. All right, so we have a question. Is there a way to record vinyl records using Cubase 12? Using Cubase 12 Pro. So, Cubase 12 Pro just records audio. So if you get get your record player connected directly to your audio interface, a lot of vinyl, a lot of contemporary turntables will have a USB out. And if that's the case, you could just come to your studio input, and then we could just set the so if it has like a digital connection over USB, is select your turntable here. If you don't see it listed, especially on a Windows platform, you may have to select generic low latency driver and then go into the settings and choose which input your turntable is. But as long as you can get audio into your audio interface directly, you could do that. Some turntables you may need to connect a ground to the system. There's a number of inexpensive turntable preamps, so it could really depend on how the audio outputs of your turntable as well. But Cubase can capture any audio source without issues. All right, so we see Mutlu Demis checking in from Istanbul. So we hope that, I was thinking of you as watching all this devastating footage of the earthquake in Turkey, and we hope that you're safe. You and your family and friends are all safe, and you're in our thoughts. It's devastating to watch. All right, but thank you for being on today. All right, and we see Patrick Manuvel A is checking in from India. Thanks for joining us. Jovanovic 3D says, somebody please talk me out of Nuendo. I really don't need it, but I want it anyway. Too many goodies for music production. So since I kind of represent Steinberg, I won't necessarily talk you out of jumping up to Nuendo, and it's on sale now, I think in the New Year, New Gear sale. So So it's a wonderful opportunity to kind of jump up. Okay, sorry, my chat field just jumped. All right, so we have RFB checking in from Holland. We have Audio Sound Doctor checking in from Kosovo, and Multi-Sentence saying hello from Germany. So you see from Walter Till, thanks, Greg. The marker project logical command will be such a great tool for audiobooks when moving all tracks, including the marker. So yeah. All right, so we see Patrick Emmanuel A asks, what's the best export quality on Cubase? So if you wanted to, it could really, what I would do is, let's say if your project is a 24-bit 48K or 24-bit 96K, I would probably keep it at the same sample rate. But when we go to our export audio mixdown, if you want the highest quality, make sure one that we go to our studio menu to studio setup, and when you go to the audio system that you are choosing 64-bit float. So if that is selected as 64-bit float, then come over here and go to export audio mixdown. And for the bit depth on the audio file, choose 64-bit floating point. And it could be incredibly subtle, but mastering, really good mastering engineers can hear the difference. But a lot of times if you, kind of keep it the same resolution as the project, you could do a test and see if it makes a difference for you. But mathematically, the highest quality would be, keeping it as a 64-bit float point file. But realize that a lot of things won't be able to read that. More other programs will be able to read it as 32-bit float. You could then take it into other programs and convert it. So, having a really high resolution master that's a 64-bit floating point when many programs can't open that could be an issue. So to be aware of it, so think of what your final delivery mechanism will be, but, to have no compromise in the signal processing and all the mixing, I would choose 64-bit floating point for the bit depth. All right, so we have Sarah Rossi checking in from Italy. Thanks for joining us. All right, we have Matt Elston from London, just sending best wishes to everyone. All right, so we have a question. Can I copy and paste a volume automation into another track? My experience is with C and V was not accurate, didn't work sometimes. So if you want to do this, so one of the great functions that you could utilize is, all right, so let's say if I'm here and I just want to duplicate this particular track. Okay, so let's say I just have automation drawn in. So now if I wanted to select, so I will select all this automation and I'm going to copy. And if I accidentally kind of moved the position and I hit, and let's say I come over to this automation track and I paste, if I moved the point, it may move the position and it's going to paste it based on the cursor position. But one of the other tools you could use instead of Control or Command plus the letter V, like Victor, is Alt or Option plus V. And that will paste at origin. So that way, regardless of where my cursor position is, so if I move my cursor here and I do Control or Command plus the letter V, it'll paste it based on the relationship to the cursor. So if that changes and you don't want that to be a factor, use Alt or Option plus the letter V, and that will paste it at the same exact position. So that's how you could copy events. So instead of a paste, the paste relationship is based upon the project play position, but paste at origin is based upon the actual time position. So if you do paste at origin, then it's never going to be shifted out of time slightly. All right, so we have Mark Isper checking in. All right, so we see Patrick asks, Greg, what's the best level should I mix while I mix with headphones? I always try to mix, and one of the things I've learned from, spending time with Elliot Shiner, he's probably like, the most highly acclaimed mix engineer in the world. He tends to mix very, very softly. One, he doesn't want ear fatigue, but he's always like, yeah, if it sounds great at a really low volume, it'll, it's like, it's almost cheating to crank it up and have it sound great. That's easy to do, but to make it sound great at a really low volume is something that's really good. The thing you always have to worry about mixing with headphones is, I try, I wear headphones for work, sometimes, 6-7 hours a day, and I'm going to turn off my phone. Sorry about that. So, I just try to be very cognizant and not wear my ears out with headphones. So I would tend to, it's hard to measure like a dB value in headphones, but, err on, mix on his side of lower volume. So I'm not sure if it's the monitoring levels that you're looking for with on the headphones or the monitoring levels in the project. All right, so we see a question. Hi, Greg. I have my Cubase preferences stored as a preset. Can I make it as a default preference? So the preset for preferences, that will stick until another preset is loaded in. So, if you saved it as a preset, it's not going to change those particular preferences until you go to load a different preference preset. So it should remain and be active all the way until you intentionally load up a different preset for you. So in that way, it will be the default unless you choose to load up a different preset. All right, so we see Michael Pierce on from outside of London. He's working on some edits. Thanks for joining us. All right, so Walter Till asks, is it possible to change the view intensity of the hatched overlays? So let's say maybe it's with this. So let me just come over here, and let's say if I have two tracks that are kind of overlaid with each other. So I'm not sure if it's like the diagonal lines here. I don't think we could change that, but let's see if we could take a look. See if maybe we adjust the grid lines, if that, no, it doesn't seem to make, yeah, so I don't know of a way, but if it's with these diagonal lines, let me know if that's it or if I'm misunderstanding. But I don't think that there's a way to change that. But there is one other thing. Let's go take a look. Also in preferences, if you get to the event display, and we'll check the grid overlay, see if that makes a difference. So here we can see the grid kind of more popping out. And let's try the event handling opacity. So maybe all right, so let's say those are overlapping. So maybe the event opacity, if you adjust that, so if I come here, we can see kind of the diagonal lines, and if we take that all the way down, we could just kind of see that. So let me know if that's kind of what you're looking for, if that's like those diagonal lines, and if that's what you mean by the hatched overlaps. All right, so we get see a question from Yazian Trebi. It says, could you show us how to make a radio show template, radio show empty template in Cubase 12? So I'm not sure how many tracks you need, but if you're just kind of recording, so let's come over here and say, okay, I want to do a new project, and let's say we had like a host and 3 guests, something like that. Or 2 hosts. All right. So I'll come over here. So let's just create empty. All right. So let's say now I want to add an audio track. I'll make this mono. All right. So we'll say main host. And let's say, okay, I want to come over here. Let's make this mono, and we'll say co-host. And I will. All right, and let's add 2 guests. So I'll just come here, guest 1, guest 2. I'll make a stereo track, and let's say this is, I'm not sure, I won't really work in industry, but let's say we want this for advertisements. And let's have, and let's say we have an external input configured in our control room, and let's say we want this to be, Skype audio or Zoom / Skype audio. And then if you wanted to just record that, so say, okay, now I will come over here and we can put this all into a particular folder. So at this point we could just say, okay, now we're going to record this particular show And if you wanted to even have different, sounds that were triggered in Groove Agent, maybe, if you wanted to have different, the show intros, you could just trigger these as samples in Groove Agent, and so that way you could have kind of like, your show bumpers and stuff like that. And now just come over here and we'll save as template, and we'll just call it radio show. So we hit OK, and now when we go to do a new project, we'll say, okay, let's go to more, and then we'll say radio show. Great, we'll give it like a date. So let's say, okay, I want this to go into February 7th, 2023. And then we'll activate the project. And now if I wanted to just, come over here, I could just hit record and then record on all the different devices and record the whole show if you wanted to, and fire off different intro, outro music. And if you wanted someone to, that's patched into different audio inputs from a different computer, and record all the different sources. So let me know if that's helpful, or if you needed to show other things, or to include other elements. All right, so we see what pan law is best to use. So a lot of people will default to -3 dB, but there's no real set standard. Some people will manipulate pan law, so that when you kind of pan something hard left or hard right, that it, you can make it louder on the edges. And then as you bring it in, like panned more towards the center, that it gets attenuated there, but it sounds wider. So some people manipulate pan law, but there's no, perfect answer for that. So, but you could always experiment and see what you like. All right, so you see Benny just asking, Greg, did you get my email about the MIDI remote? But yeah, if you want to ask it again, so I think it was about setting up kind of a control room volume. So I wasn't sure if you were doing it and if you want to specify this. So I think you want to set up the control room volume so you didn't have to reset it all the time with your particular controller, but you should be able to kind of do that. But I'm not sure if you're doing it in generic remote or MIDI remote. So if you could specify if you're doing it in the MIDI remote, Benny, that would be helpful, and then I could go over it later if you give me just a clarification on that. All right, so you see DL White just saying hi from Fort Worth, Texas. He says he's learned so much from the series. Thank you. So thanks for the kind words. We hope that we could teach people a lot more tips and tricks. Okay, so we have a question from Patrick. Greg, if a song could be mixed 100 different ways, how someone hearing our songs deciding its mistakes and telling this and not be like this, that's not correct, things like that. What's your thought? There's always, I think that with some mixes, people, there could be common consensus on some mix, like, okay, this particular element is really muffled, or, this guitar comes in way too loud, or, I can't understand the singer once this guitar comes in. I think that there's different elements. Unfortunately, if you ask 100 people, to comment on your mix, you may get 110 different responses. So there's always people that are going to want to comment, but it's always good, maybe to have a trusted person to bounce ideas off. And I think as you work more and you see how, your mixes translate to different environments, and, what does it sound like? I know people that will specifically, change the levels of their output mix for Spotify, And like, okay, on YouTube you use this this loudness setting, and Spotify you want this one, and Apple Music you want this, and they will specifically set levels for different streaming services for the same mix. So there, there's no real right or wrong answer to, and I think it was, Duke Ellington said, if it sounds good, it is good. I could be misappropriating that quote, but it's a good concept. But there's no perfect way, but just make sure that you can hear everything. That everything is kind of sitting in its place. That when you turn it down, that you could still hear components. Like if it's super low, make sure you hear like the snare and the vocal, like in a pop track. If you turn it up, make sure there's not too much bass. So everyone will give you their opinion. And there's going to be some people, if you do it really well, they're just going to be jealous, because they wanted to do it really well. So I wish there was an easy answer for that, Patrick. All right. So we see, will Steinberg come with a free Spotify YouTube distributor like TuneCore or DistroKid? So, I think we used to, at some point we did some work, I think, with TuneCore. We did kind of a promotion, for Cubase users to get into TuneCore with one version or so. But, I think that they're often, I wouldn't anticipate it as being like an area of focus for Steinberg. But, they did it in the past, and I don't think they're doing it now. So, I'm not sure, why the decision was made or changed. So, but I think it'll be kind of, two separate entities with that. Okay, so you see Michael Pierce, a seasoned user, says, like, show data on tracks, revolution of the week, and this early on. So used to working without that, it's getting turned on tomorrow. You could even turn it on today. So. Yeah, and because Michael Pierce's revelation of the week, he's slapped the like button. All right. See, Peter Brown just says, hi, Greg, thanks for all your services. You're welcome. Glad to be helpful and to aid in people creating music. All right, so we have a question from Patrick. And the question is, I have a bunch of Midi instruments. I want to render all the 45 instruments to separate folder or lined up and down the Midi instrument. Is there a way to do like this? So, if you have a number of, different instruments, just... the render in place will kind of do that for you, like visually. So let's say if I'm here and I want to take, my drums and bass and let's say my strings, I think I have some strings. So let's say, okay, I want to take piano, strings, and let's say the bass and my drums. So I have those channels selected. So what we could do now is just go to render in place. And we could just say, okay, let's come over here to our render settings. I'll just make it channel settings. We can make it one event. And now I will choose render. And even if we have multiple tracks, at this point, all of the audio would be aligned directly underneath the source events. And we could have it muted. We could have the instruments disabled once that's done. So again, just kind of select. So let's say I'll just do these two here. All right, so we'll do this one event and we'll mute the source events. And these will be placed directly into the project folder. Oh, sorry, I have these bounced. Sorry. All right. Operator error on my part. So say we render. Just cancel. All right, so now when I come over here, I'll just do the render in place correctly, hopefully this time, and we'll choose not to mix down. So now we take this and I say render. Then the audio parts would just get placed directly underneath. So, and that's all you had to do. So these would be rendered for you automatically. So just select the events. And if we go to your export audio mixdown, that we could come over here and, you know, we could just export. So I could say, okay, I want to take all of my instrument tracks, click on multiple, and then we could actually choose your path. And if you wanted to go and have everything go directly to a specific folder or to a project mixdown folder, you can choose your destination there if you want it to be placed into a separate folder. So, but the render in place does that already, and you know, very easy and fast. So try that, Patrick. Okay, so we have a question. Is it possible to change the names in Midi remote? For example, if you assign sends that you know those knobs are your sends or other things that you are assigning. So when we go to like the Midi remote, just get mine connected here. So let's say if I go to my controller here, so whatever it's assigned to, you know, so if I come over here, so say I double click and we go into, you know, let's say I want to go to the selected track and I want this to go to send level 1. And so now as soon as, you know, if we wanted to look at our, you know, Midi remote, we could see kind of, you know, we'll see icons, but you could also create, as you create the particular, if you assign the particular element here. So let me just make this larger so it's a little easier to see. You know, we could add a, so as soon as we come over here, we could add kind of a label field so we can see that this would be send. It's not really dynamic, you know, so you get kind of a sense, you know, what it's controlling. What I see a lot of people do is, you know, just have this open, and then whenever they touch a particular parameter, it will show, and that's why we could open up the mapping assistant anywhere that you want. So if I just come here, let's say I go to my Korg Nano control, that, you know, if I'm here, And I have this, any button that I select will be kind of highlighted in the Korg Nano control just by kind of pressing the particular button. So now I could press this button and you could see what particular function is going on. So so the mapping assistant will do it, but there's no way to automatically do it. And a lot of functions, like if you're using quick controls, may just, that could control, 4,000 different elements inside of Cubase. All right, Agent K says hit the thumbs up button. All right, so we have a question. What are some fast and effective ways to create a separate track for an audio event we sliced from a particular track? Example, put vocal throws from lead vox or separate vocals under lead vocal track. So one of the things that you could do, so let's say if I have, let's say this is my, so say this is our lead guitar part here in this case. So what I know some people will do is just right click and duplicate tracks. And then you could come over here and just say, okay, I just really wanted to take this out and I wanted to, do different elements here. Maybe like, okay, and to do kind of a separate thing. Some people I know will come over and use, so if you wanted the original to be retained, you could do it like that. One other way is utilizing track versions. So we could say, okay, let's duplicate. So if we click just right here to the name, let's duplicate this track version. And now I could do all of my edits on this particular track version. And then I say, okay, I want to go back to the original. It's there. And now this could be my, choice of alternate edits. So, coming over. So, I would either duplicate the particular track and, and work on a separate track, or you could just simply, at this point, maybe duplicate to a new track version and do all of your edits directly there. And that way, you could utilize the same processing, EQs, effect sends, and inserts, and all that good stuff. So let me know if if that is helpful. All right, so we see a question. Can you move the play bar up? So I think at the top, you could have transport buttons. So if you go to the settings wheel, you could have the transport controls on the top, or if you wanted them fixed at the bottom, you could also hit F2, which is function 2. And then you could move the transport to the top or to the bottom if you want. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so we see, will the source code from Cubase be free like the SDK? Yeah, so I don't think we're going to give away source code. All right, so you see Patrick asks, Greg, suggest us some books which you heard from composers and mix engineers, refer more which they learned more and be helpful for us. I can't think of any books off the top of my head. I mean, I think most people that I've worked with, are doing kind of more experiential learning, like where they're experiencing it and just kind of doing it and making lots of mistakes before anyone is really paying attention to them. but I think that there's a lot of books that could be used, maybe there's probably some good, I think Rimsky-Korsakov has I think, and I could be mistaken on a composer, but like his guide to orchestration, a lot of people still utilize, so, like check out some orchestration books, mixing books. It's tough. A lot of times people want load up this plug-in preset and have your vocal mixed, and it's, rarely does that situation come up, and that, what the preset was made for may work on the song that someone was using that preset for. But I think every song will present, unique opportunities, for you to kind of do something interesting. So listen to a wide variety of music, like I remember I saw a picture online of Hans Zimmer, and he had a Rickenbacker bass. And I remember when I was at his studio last, he had a Maple Glow Rickenbacker, and he had a Hofner. So I was like, oh, so you must be a McCartney fan. He's like, no, actually Lemmy, that's why I have a Rickenbacker, So I wouldn't think of Hans Zimmer as being into Motorhead, but, evidently, it made an impression enough for him to buy a Rickenbacker bass. So being able to listen to stuff outside of normal realms and, being able to take those influences in is a really, I think a very powerful thing that, sometimes traditional composers, may run into kind of where they don't take advantage of that. And there's so many kind of great, elements to draw from all sorts of different things, and, study art, watch how a movie plot is laid out, watch how a TV show plot is laid out, and learn something from another art form and apply that to your music, because it's all about kind of communicating something, emotion and passion. So if a film does that to you, figure out what the film did and see if that could influence your music. And, over the years, if you study kind of the relationship between arts, why we had, would we have had, French Impressionist music without Monet in art? So, would we really have, the different composers? So, often music would follow the art scene. So, but try to just learn about different arts and different concepts and thoughts, and that could help your music a lot. All right, sorry, my chat field jumped on me. All right. All right. So we see Jeff Westman. Can you discuss the MIDI port setup? I can't get my Panorama P6 to work with MIDI remote. Suspect that might be the problem. Can't get it to work. So if you have, the one thing that could be blocking like the functions on your Panorama from working, like a lot of times you may have functions in the Panorama that are working via generic remote or via Mackie control. So if we go to your studio menu to studio setup, and if you have, and I can never get the, I think that there is a little script, like maybe a generic remote script or a MIDI remote script that, or a generic remote or Mackie control that the Panorama works with. I can never get it working on mine. And so if it's being used under remote devices, that could be blocking those functions from being able to communicate with the MIDI remote. So try to see, and if you see this set up for, for your panorama, try to turn that off, and then it should, because that may be kind of just intercepting the control messages before it could get to the MIDI remote. So try doing that, Jeff. All right, so we have David Barbouche checking in from Tampa. Spent a lot of time in Tampa when I used to be part of my territory way back when. All right, so we see a question from David. Seriously, why should I upgrade to Nuendo from Cubase 12? So I would say if you're doing music production, that it's going to be, Cubase would offer all the same functionality for music production. Now, where Nuendo is going to differ and what it's going to offer in addition to is going to be if you're doing a lot of stuff for like ADR replacement, like, working on dialogue, if you need to import like Dolby Atmos ADM files, so Cubase can mix and export ADM files, but it's not going to import ADM files. If you're working in game audio, so we're going to have, interconnectivity with Audio Kinetics, Wise, game middleware. There's going to be some additional sound design utilities and plugins. So if you wanted to, to be able to have take a voice and make it sound like a robot, stuff like that. Or I want to take footsteps and do like variations, like a randomizer plugin for audio. Nuendo will have that. So, there is a lot, if you needed Netflix dialogue file format and Netflix audio metering, if you were doing productions for Netflix, Nuendo is going to have specific tools for those types of things where often you need kind of a purpose-built solution. It's often, more than the cost of Nuendo in of itself to get a DAW to do that, those types of tools. And if you're doing just kind of music production, probably, Cubase would meet all of your needs. All right, so we see Michael Teams from Weatherford, Texas, has been able to make it. It's from a rainy and cool Dallas area. Thanks for joining us. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin from Montana. And it's above freezing there. So I was thinking of you last night, Mark Rabin. I was watching a travel show where they went to Montana. Looked incredibly beautiful. All right, so we see Bruce Bruton as able to join in enough from Simi Valley to hit the like button. Thank you for that. All right, so we have a question. What's the best method to import an audio file into a session to match the tempo when you don't know tempo, beats, etc.? So let's say if I'm here, just find a particular project here I'm thinking of. Okay. So let's say I have an audio file, and let's say that its tempo is varying. So we'll show kind of two ways of doing this. Whether you want an audio file, and I got this question kind of mailed in, how to get like a track that was recorded previously to match to a drum loop. So I'll show that, and how to get the drum loop to match to a previously recorded track with different. So, we have to figure out what you want to be kind of the tempo, whether you want Cubase to be the master tempo and the audio to follow that, or you want Cubase to follow the audio. So let's say we have this particular track, and as we play it, We can see that's not really, the metronome is, completely arbitrary. So what I'm going to do is, let's say I want to figure out what the tempo of this file is. So I'm going to go to, and we can do this for multi-track, or so I'm just going to select a file here. We'll go to project and we'll do a tempo detection. So I'll say analyze. All right, and we'll listen to it. Okay, so now we've kind of figured out what the tempo is. So we can see that there's tempo fluctuations in this particular piece. So I'm going to find kind of the downbeat here. It's probably, and it figures out everything by the beat. So now I'm going to just kind of drop in my time signature event of 4/4. So it will change the meter to 1/4. All right, so let's say I wanted a drum loop to follow the tempo of this particular file. So I'll go to my media and let's find a drum loop. All right, so say we'll do something highly inappropriate like that drum loop. And I'm going to start this drum loop on the downbeat, and I'm going to tell it to be, so now we listen to it. The drum loop's playing at its tempo, but it's not following the tempo of this particular file. Now, a lot of drum loops that you have will have tempo information embedded in it. Sometimes you may not have the ability of knowing what the tempo is of the drum loop, and if that's the case, you could just kind of come over. So let's say if I'm just playing this particular drum loop, so if we wanted to figure out kind of what the tempo is of this drum loop, we could just come over here and say, and if you go to project, you could go to beat calculator and type in, let's say, okay, is this 32 beats? Just looking at it, and then it will say, okay, it's 94 beats a minute. So we could see what the tempo is of this. And at that point, we would go to our pool window under media, and we could just say this drum loop is, and just enter in 94 beats a minute. So now that we know the tempo of this, and we want it to match the tempo of the recorded signal, what I would need to do is to place this into musical mode. So I could do this directly from our pool window again, enable musical mode, or I could select the event on the timeline and put musical mode on. So now as we play, this tempo is going to automatically follow the tempo changes that are going on from the original source. So as I drag it out, but what if I want the original source to play back, not at a varying tempo, but at a steady tempo? At this point, I could select the file. We go to audio. Let's go to advanced, and we'll say set definition from tempo. And we can do this on multiple events or a single event. So now Cubase knows what the tempo changes are, not just statically, but dynamically within the audio file itself. So if we play this, and we can see our tempo fluctuating here, roughly around like 144, I'm going to turn off the tempo changes. And I'm just going to say, let's go to 140. Now everything is playing at the same tempo. So if I say, let's make it 156. So now my imported audio is playing at a steady tempo. So I could have the audio, take an audio file, figure out what its tempo is, have other audio match the varying tempo. Or once I know that what the tempo is, get audio advanced to set definition from tempo, and then whatever tempo I have in Cubase, the audio file that was not a steady tempo will now be a steady tempo. But either way, I could take, have Cubase, follow the tempo of the audio, or have the audio follow the tempo of Cubase. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, we see Mutlo just says, yeah, it was a very big earthquake. Yeah, I saw that there was the 7.5 or 7.6 aftershock. So we hope everyone is doing okay, or it's just terrible conditions. All right. So we see from Matt Lewis, could you show an example of how to slow down an audio clip and how to make a sampler track with the audio? Thank you. So just as we did here, once I've gone through this process, I could just come right over here and we'll type in, let's say 120 beats a minute. I say it's good 96 beats a minute. So this is just stretching it in real time as it plays. So that's how you could kind of slow down audio. Now, if you wanted to take an audio file, and the second question was how to take the audio file and convert it, how to make a sampler track with the audio. So all you have to do is open the sampler control in the bottom zone, and then you could just drag the audio directly in. And then you could just manipulate it and play it like from your MIDI keyboard. See, DL White says Alt plus V is magic. Thank you. So yeah, it's a handy keyboard shortcut to know. All right. Lovely to see Brian Sawyer from Wilmington, North Carolina, or Beulahville. All right. Tim Weinheimer says always learn great tips here. All right. Wonderful to see Cubase X on. All right, so we have a question from Ariana. Addie, Greg, in Cubase 12, in Cubase Pro 12, when I program in MIDI notes, they come in doubled. There's two notes on top of each other. How can I just get one layer? Thank you. So it's probably your MIDI controller is transmitting two notes. And you could see it pretty easily if you come over to like a MIDI insert. So let's say if I go to an instrument track here, and then just go to MIDI inserts and go to MIDI monitor. So probably what's going on is as you had hit a single note, you'll see two notes. So like if I hit F2 here, but you'll see it on channel 1 and probably channel 2. So probably the controller keyboard you have connected, its internal sound is probably something like, strings in piano layered together, and it's playing two different MIDI notes. So the easiest way is to take your particular MIDI keyboard and just put it on a preset that's transmitting one sound only on one MIDI channel. And you could try different presets and just look at the MIDI monitor and see if it's all being done on one particular MIDI channel. Now, there is a solution if you can't figure out how to get that going, is on your MIDI tracks here. If your controller, can't figure out how to do it in your controller, we'll just go to the input transformer, and we can put this on a track level or global level, and there's different presets that you'll have in here. So you want to enable, and let's go to your factory presets, and you'll see channel filtering. And you'll see I only want to record on MIDI channel 1. And what this will do is filter out any channel that's not on channel 1. So you could do input transformers, but it's probably your MIDI controller is actually transmitting those two notes, kind of almost like a stacked setup. So and if you change it to like a single voice sound, it'll probably just fix itself automatically. But use under the MIDI inserts, just use the MIDI monitor plugin, and you could clearly see when you hit one note, it's going to be transmitting two MIDI messages, and Cubase is doing a good job accepting the information that you're sending to it. So. All right. See, Michael Teams is doing his ice cream distribution. All right, so we see from Mike Weiser, is there a web page of macros on edits specifically to chop up, snap to grid, apply fade-ins and fade-outs, my own drum samples recorded? So, a lot of times you could, there may be something in the Cubase Nation Discord, but if you have like a number of like drum samples, there's a lot of stuff where, not even necessarily macro based, but let's say, if I come over to, all right, so let's say I have like this snare hit. All right, and let's say I come here, and let's say I'm just recording a bunch of samples. Let's say I've now come over, and I'll just bounce the selection here quickly. So let's say I just wanted to play different samples and chop it up. So even if it's not necessarily a macro, like for a lot of drum edits, you could just come over here and go to audio, and let's go to processes, or it might be under advanced, and we could just say detect silence. So we could set a particular threshold, analyze, and at that point we could just say process, and then you could just kind of automatically separate different sounds. So, but if there's, there's lots of different macros and pages, I don't know any that I could, recite off the top of my head. I would go to the Cubase Nation Discord. But if you have like a particular function, and like if I wanted to do a fade out on all these, I could just, do the fade just like that with them all selected. So maybe not, there's a lot of particular editing tasks specifically for kind of what you described that may not require a macro to use. But if you have like specific things that you want to do, just let me know, and I could show how to do stuff like that. All right, so we see from Best Green Jesus, is there a function which is the opposite of real copies, such as linking pre-existing ones, or should I replace them all with linked copies? Okay, so with the shared copies, there's no, if you're not familiar with this, what a shared copy will allow you to do, let's say, okay, so if I make a copy here, and drag it out, and if I wanted to make a change in these particular notes, I may want that change to be applied to other copies. So to do this, just on background, if you hold down like Shift and go to the right edge, that now you could come over here, and as I make a change in this particular one, it's going to automatically reflect in the other ones. Now to convert this to make it independent, we'd go to Edit, to Functions, and I had a brain cramp on this a couple weeks ago. So Edit to Functions, and then we can convert to real copy. but we can't take an existing event and say turn this into a shared copy. So you'd have to kind of recreate it again, but often it's just holding down shift and dragging it out, and then you could create. So it's easy enough to kind of create shared copies, if not, but there isn't a way. And I've kind of asked for it just as a contrarian function, like if you do this, do the opposite. Being able to take something and convert it, take an existing copy and convert it into a shared copy. So, but it doesn't exist currently. Sorry about that. And glad you can make it to the live stream. Best Green Jesus. All right. So we see Greg. Can I ask a question about the DAW industry? You say one reason to not mention future features of Cubase is telling other companies. How much do DAW companies look at each other? Isn't it bad? You always want to be able to offer, particular functions that are available on other platforms to your users. So if something makes sense, and I think that, Cubase has probably been the most copied DAW on the market. This whole concept of seeing parts on, a linear arrangement that we take for granted, VST plugins, editing music while it plays, and we can go back, almost 40 years in Steinberg's history of stuff that's just been kind of pretty blatantly copied. So the companies do pay attention to each other. I'm not one that goes and sees what other companies are doing. I'm pretty, focused just on trying to get the most out of Cubase and being able to explain that to customers. But I do know that a lot of our companies do watch these live streams pretty carefully and learn a lot. So, and a lot of companies have tried to mimic these live streams and have given up on maintaining that. So there's a lot of companies that watch what Steinberg does, because we kind of define the feature set and expectations for customers. So. All right, so we have Clayton Workman just checking in from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Thanks for joining us. Not too far from me in Virginia. All right. All right. So you see from Walter Till, it was the diagonal line. So yeah, try the event opacity preference under event display audio. All right, just reading through questions and comments. All right, you see Mark Winslow saying aloha to everyone. All right, so we see from Yazian, just ask, could you send me the template from the radio show to my Gmail? So I think I saw an email come in during the live stream, so I'll send it right afterwards. And let me know if there's anything else you want it to be added to that. All right, so we see Sable Winters. Just wants everyone to hit the like button. I see DL White just says I could just in the name that will increment the numbers. So yeah, I forgot that. Thanks for reminding me. Like when in the add track dialog box. Okay, Michael Teams wants people to whack the like button. All right. All right, so we see from Mark Rabin, Groove Agent seeking a better way, set Groove Agent mixer to individual outs, brings to mixer, and then I want to bounce or render. Do I have to export? So now, really, all you have to do is, once the outputs are defined, is just do a render in place. So let's say, just okay, so let's say if I'm here on this particular project, well, and this would basically be the same in Beat Agent or Groove Agent, but let's say I'll just okay, so let's say I have my pattern here, and then while this is playing, like I say, I want this kick going out of output 2, this kick going out of output 2, let's say my snare out of output 3, output 3, and let's say this out of my hi-hat out of output 4, and let's say this snare out of output 3. All right, so now when we click here, we can see our different outputs. So really now what I need to do is I'm going to go to my render in place settings. I'll just stop that playing. Let's go to render in place, under edit, to render in place. And let me just make this take this event. Let's get to our render settings, and I'm going to employ channel settings. And now when I render, we will now have kind of our kick, snare, hi-hat, all broken down into individual tracks. So we could just come over here. So once you just have the outputs set, whether it's a Beat Agent kit or if it is going to be in the mixer in Groove Agent here, once those outputs are defined, and if you wanted to turn those into separate audio tracks, all you have to do is just hit the render in place, and then that each audio output will have its own destination for rendering. So let me know if that's helpful, Mark. So we see a question, is the mix snapshot feature in Pro only? So it may be, and if you're not familiar with the mix console snapshots, is that you could set up different functions. So I could be inclined to think that it might be a Cubase Pro thing. I wouldn't think it may be in Cubase Elements. I don't know for absolutely sure. But if you want to email me, I could check it out and see if let me see if it's in Elements. I think I may have Cubase Elements installed now. Let me just take a look. So I don't know about Artist. I don't really have a way of running Artist as well at the same time. Yeah, so it looks like in Elements it's not in there. I'm not sure about Artists, but if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I'd be happy to check to see if it's available on Artist for you. But I'm inclined to think that it might be just a Pro only thing. All right, so we see from Roland Gerard, is there a plan at Steinberg to add functionalities to the arranger mode? So I haven't, I often can't discuss anything that's being developed in the future, but it's an area that's seen some minor updates. So like we've seen more capabilities with remote control of it, where you could go to different chains and be able to do that from Midi messages and using that directly in the in the new Midi remote, as well as through generic remote, where you could trigger different arrangement ideas or different parts of a project through that. But nothing that I could share. But if there's any particular features that you want, please feel free to pass it on to me. You could send it to me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, and I'd be happy to pass it along. All right, so we see Michael Romanowski from Coast Mastering. Everyone give Michael a big congratulations because he won a Grammy. I think it was Best Engineered Classical Performance. So congratulations, Michael. I think I saw on Facebook that you won another Grammy, so it's wonderful. So proud of you. All right, so we have Tiago checking in from Brazil. All right, so Michael Teams has granted my family and myself 1 gallon of Dulcet Tones ice cream. He says, think pineapple, coconut, vanilla. That sounds pretty spectacular. Thank you so much. All right, so Diamond District Studios. It's wonderful to see you back from sunny South Africa. Great to have you back. All right, so we have a question. Hi, Greg. Can you explain and demonstrate the suspend VST3 plugin processing when no audio signals are received? What are the pros and cons? Okay, so this is just a particular preference. So, and we'll see it when we go to plugins. So as we come over here, we'll just say preferences. And we go to plugins. So and we see this little preset here, suspend VST3 plugin processing when no audio signals are received. So let's say we had a song going on and like we have plugins that are processing, like really heavy plugins that are processing this. And we look at this section here, and let's say we have tracks that are coming in. As we go into the chorus, we add more tracks. As we go into the verse, we take tracks away. If these tracks that have plugins aren't playing any audio, or instruments aren't playing any audio, aren't generating audio, those plugins, instead of just sitting there taking processing power away from other tasks or other tracks, with this preference turned on, those plugins are not going to utilize CPU power just sitting there not doing anything. So when this preference is unchecked, the plugins are going to take the same amount of processing power whether they're doing anything or not. So there's pros and cons to this. So depending, you may have a song, if you have that turned on, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, my song plays great in the verse, but when I, add, 800 tracks during the chorus, at that point my CPU takes a hit. Why didn't it take a hit during the verse as well? So that's really kind of the only con. So with what that preference does is if the plugin isn't processing any audio, and that's including MIDI information that's then being, generated to an audio signal, that it's not going to take any CPU cycles away from you. So, and I think it's a great preference to have for a lot of plugins that sit idle and still take a lot of memory and a lot of CPU cycles. You could just simply cut off the CPU cycles. Okay, so we see, so Says Greg, on the browse window, we have VSTi. How to use that in a productive way? Every time I see it, but I have no idea what it's for. So I think if it's over here, so let's say, so this will show you, so if it's this is like your VST rack. These are kind of showing you all the different instruments that are being utilized. And let's say, if we have, 12 different ones that say Hallian Sonic SE, you could actually just double click and rename each of these. So I'm not sure. So this shows you all the different VST instruments that are currently being utilized in the particular project. If we see, like if we come over here to media and we see our VST instruments, here we could just drag and place instruments and to load them up. So we could drag and drop. If I wanted to replace the instrument on this track, I could just drag and drop and replace the instrument. So the Hallian Sonic went away and now it's replaced by Padshop 2. And then if you have like VST3 presets, you could come over here and just say, okay, I want that particular preset, drag the preset over, it will load the instrument and load up that instrument with that particular preset so that you could just immediately get to work. So but this one shows you kind of all the instruments that are being utilized in the project, whether it's an instrument track or if you want it to be just an instrument rack where a Midi track could get routed to. All right, so I see I accidentally skipped Soren's question, so. All right, so we see AJ Soundbites. It says he saw the notification for the live stream, so turned the PC on to watch it, but mistakenly opened Cubase first. That's good. You can follow along. So. Great, my chat field just jumped. Okay, so you see Benny has sent an email again, but if you want to just ask in the questions, that would be, we could probably get to it quicker. All right, so you see from AJ Soundbites question, I was hoping to use the faders for dynamics and expression, but even after changing the CC control number in Midi remote map with Cubase, okay, so, if you're using it for, let's say, typical expression type of stuff, so, we could think of like the Midi remote, so if I wanted to jump back here, let's say, okay, I have my Choice OS controller. All right, so, let's say I have 7 faders connected and I have 8 faders. All right, so when I come to like this Midi track and we go to my Midi monitor, so I'll just go to my Midi insert. Let's get to Midi monitor. We could see that this is going to transmit Midi messages. And when I come over here, so if you're using it for standard CC messages, I wouldn't use it in the Midi remote. We could think of the Midi remote as taking like incoming Midi faders and controlling different aspects of the program. But if you're writing like CC11 and CC1, CC7, very typical for working with sample libraries, just have your Midi fader box transmit those particular Midi messages and record it into the part. So just for working with Midi CC messages, don't use the Midi remote. Just record it as Midi data onto the part. The MIDI remote is when I want to take a MIDI CC message and control the level of, the panning, the volume, to control a parameter. And we use MIDI CC message as kind of the language to connect those two different elements. So just, if you need to write standard MIDI CCs, don't define the faders in the remote, because it's not the intention. Just record the standard, leave those particular faders alone. Don't define it in here. And then you just record it as traditional MIDI information with the part. Yeah, so I see Agent K he missed Soren's question, so maybe if you could ask it again. All right, so we see DL White. I think this might be a book recommendation, Zen and the Art of Mixing. So I haven't read that one. So. See, Best Green Jesus says he says when I move devices, I notice that my chat messages aren't here. All right, John Costigan says, please hit the like button so that he doesn't have to eat Texas dirt ice cream with West Texas gravel on top. So we see Curtis McDonald ask, is there a way for Cubase to read the default I/O configuration of an interface? I'm a little surprised it appears I have to manually assign and label all the dozens of I/O paths manually. So Cubase doesn't want to naturally assume, so let's say you're recording, if you're doing everything in 5.1, should Cubase assume that you're outputting everything in mono, all your outputs? Or should it assume that you're outputting it in stereo? Should it assume that you're outputting it in 5.1, 7.1, or 7.14 for Atmos? So sometimes we don't necessarily want to make assumptions. Do you need stereo inputs? Do you need mono inputs? Do you need 5.1 inputs? So, so if you want it to all be, for particular inputs that you have on your system, all you have to do is go to your audio connections, and we go to inputs. You'll see presets. So if you have, if you have 48 inputs, you could just add 48 mono inputs and have it automatically configured. You could add 24 stereo outputs, or, okay, I have 4 outputs, so I could add 2 stereo outputs if I wanted to. And then that would automatically increment and decrement. But, I think that no matter, because you have 48 outputs, should Cubase configure it as 48 stereo if you're going to a console? Or should it configure it to a stereo out going to your monitors? Should it automatically, because your audio interface just has outputs. How you utilize those inputs and outputs in the software is not really contingent upon, your audio interface doesn't have a default setup with it. So that's why Cubase doesn't assume that. So let me know if that makes sense. I'll just set this not connected. So, and then once you do have it all saved, all you have to do is just save a preset. So, you may want to use inputs and outputs for external processors. You may want to use outputs and inputs, or inputs for external instruments. So there's lots of different ways to have your configuration set. Okay. Okay, so I see a question from Richard Grabowski. I have a Yamaha DGX 650 keyboard going into my computer via USB, and I can see that when I play, it's recorded into a track. But I can't hear any of it when I try to play it back. All right, so probably your USB is just passing the MIDI information. So it's probably not functioning as an audio interface. So while it's transmitting the MIDI information from the Yamaha keyboard to the device, and then it transfers the MIDI information back to the Yamaha keyboard. At that point, the Yamaha keyboard will make the sound. But if you don't have the audio outputs of the Yamaha, or you don't have speakers connected to it, so when you go to a particular MIDI destination here, you would set it to output directly back to your Yamaha keyboard. Then the Yamaha is making the sound. It's outside of Cubase. So you could connect the audio outs of that into your audio interface if you have available inputs, and define it as a virtual instrument. But unlike software instruments, the sound is being generated in the DGX 650. So you need to get the audio out of the 650 back into the computer, or if you connect headphones to it, you should hear it, but it's not going to probably be sent into the computer via the USB connection. So we see, looks like Soren's or N68 is just not be able to get his questions in today, but it doesn't seem like anyone else is seeing it. All right, so you see from the Heartbreak Time Machine, just says, I'm currently working on my first major streaming series project, and Cubase is knocking it out of the park. So we have Lord Schrader just saying, one love from Essen, Germany. Finished work and enjoy y'all. All right. Thanks for popping in. All right. So a question from Patrick. Says, Greg, on the mix window, I want to see all the channel strips EQ for selected tracks. Is it possible? So let me just go to a different project so we could see it probably a little more appropriate. All right, so let's come over here to our big mix console. So I'll just make this a little smaller. So let's come over here to, so with my channel settings, I could just come over here and I could open up my EQ, directly for all of my tracks. So if you wanted to do that, and let me make sure for selected tracks. So if you come here, we could activate Q-Link. So let's say I only want it for selected tracks. So at this point, let's say I'll come over here and so this would be, our channel strip. These are going to be global, but as we change it here, so it's going to be, so as we do this, but you could save particular configurations where you say, okay, I only want to see my configurations, so show only selected channels, and then I could add a configuration, say EQ1, and let's say I want to show all channels, and I wanted to now, instead of the EQ on these particular channels, so I wanted to see the compressor and noise gate on all those channels. So we could save this. So the visibility configuration is going to be also kind of tied into, so we could, the channel configuration will do visibility and our settings. So let's say, okay, I want this to be compressor 1. So now I could just come right over here and we could switch back and forth between our different settings that we wanted to. So. All right, so we have Steve Leeds, says he's rocking steady in the Bay Area. So thanks for joining us. All right, so we see Soren's question. Greg, I had problems with the listen in the control room. I think the little button activates after fader listen mode have to be on. I had it off. Can you show the on and off uses of that after fader listen button? So, all right, let's take a look at it. Okay, I'll just revert this. All right, so let's say I want to take my snare top and I'm just going to add way too much reverb on it. Okay, and I'll just adjust my mix level here. All right, so we'll come over here to, so I'm going to enable listen mode on my snare. All right, so right now, so I think what this is going to allow you to do is to have like the effects. Sorry, yeah. Let me just try adding a different, see if I added maybe as a, so I think it's sometimes used to kind of monitor with the effects. Let me just see if I can create kind of an easier example here. All right, so let's say, all right, so when we have this is what it is. So right now, when that's not on, the level is set. And I won't hear it when the listen is turned on. The level of the fader affects it when it's turned on. But now if it's turned off, regardless of where the fader is, so now when I turn this on, you're not going to hear it in the listen bus as much because it's based on the fader position. So that's what it's for. So play around with that, and also just make sure that you have, like, you know, the listen enable and like these levels set to listen dim and the listen level, because you can bring it up as well as bring it down if needed. All right, so we see Lord Trader just says, sometimes the music mode stretch samples too long and get halftime. How to handle this, Greg? So if you notice that, like, when you put it into musical mode, and it seems like it's playing halftime, it could be that the tempo definition of the particular file. So let's say if we come over here to our pool, so we'll go to media, to our pool window. So while it's, you know, maybe instead of being 100 beats per minute, it could be that maybe it's defined as 50 beats a minute or 200 beats a minute. So it could be, you know, if it's like playing halftime when you enable in musical mode, you know, so if you have a project that's at 120 and, you know, it's at 60 beats a minute, you know, it should kind of slow down to, you may have artifacts if you're doing extreme changes. But if it's doing like halftime, it probably means that the tempo definition is the wrong factor here. So check to see if the particular file looks like it's in line for the tempo definition. And I think if you just change that it will kind of fall into place as expected. Okay. All right, we see that Soren, it's her N68, likes his strawberry ice cream from Michael Teams. All right, so we see, hi Greg, do you know how to close and open folders with the same keyboard shortcut? Also show hide automations. Okay, so I think, let's say if I come over here, I have all of these into a folder. So I think if we... I'll just set up. So I think it's just fold or toggle tracks. So let's get to our key commands. And there should be under, I think it's under project. So we could say folding, and then you could toggle tracks. So I'm going to set this up for, let's see if I have this keyboard shortcut defined. All right. All right, so I had the folder track selected. And then if I have an individual track selected, I think that will... So it's still doing the track folder. I think that so I know, so you can do the folders, just toggle selected track, and let me see if this is out of a folder. Let me just see if we can find, so we get a project and track folding. There's also flip fold states, so you could use that. I want to say that there was something on the CC121 that I'm just trying to think of, let me just see if we could find it. So set up that for the for folding toggle tracks, and let me see. And there is something similar for automation. So, and you can probably use the show used automation on selected tracks. So let's see if I assign that. Just trying to find an empty. Okay, so let's assign that. Let's see if that would open up. So let's see if I have automation on here. Yeah, so you could open it, but maybe not close it with the same keyboard shortcut. But I think that there is a way, like on the CC121 to, yeah. So if you hit the channel select left and right buttons, if you have a CC121, that will open up and toggle folders for you. So if you have a CC121, it could be done. So just by hitting the next and on the two channel select buttons together. So if you have a CC121, you could just do that. But I don't know of a key command to get rid of the folder track or get rid of the automation track rather. But I can play with it if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de. All right, so we see Danny Lopez TV question. How can I prevent it automatically panning to the left? It seems like a bug. It happens to me with Contact or Spitfire. So probably if you go to add an instrument track, see if you're just, I'm not sure what's panning to the left, but if it's being sent to like a mono output, it may just be going to the left. Or if I just say, okay, I want to add a Hallian Sonic SE and the audio outputs are mono, that it would just send that particular track just to the left. So make sure that when you go to add an instrument track, that you're doing it to the stereo output. And then as soon as I add that instrument track, then we hear it in stereo. So it's probably that the instrument track you're adding is mono or is being sent to a mono source, a mono group. All right, so we see from DL White, may I suggest cutting the final stream into question-specific clips or add markers? So usually we can't add enough markers because, there's a limited number of channel markers that you could have, and we go beyond that easily within the live stream. And that's why we do if you go directly, if you open up the top comment of any of the videos, at that point you could just jump directly to the particular topic just by clicking on the topic itself. There's a little timestamp, and that will take you directly there. So with the live streams, you know, we don't necessarily have the ability to edit it after the fact, like in a post-production scenario. It just presented live and automatically put up. You know, we could take it down and doctor it and do all sorts of stuff, but the timestamps are always going to be pinned to the very top, and I think it works pretty well. So, you know, we usually average about 100 questions, you know, 95 to 100 questions per live stream, and just the current kind of chapter systems that are in YouTube don't really accommodate that number. So that's why we do it, and you can go to cubaseindex.com and also search directly by there. All right, so Steve Leeds is also giving a big shout out to Michael Romanowski at Coast Mastering on his 4th Grammy win this week. So proud of Michael. All right. All right. So we see so we see from Danny Lopez TV, looking at the explanation of the MIDI monitor function. I saw that after the notes, a controller status 10 and a 1 change to panning will be my MIDI keyboard controller. So it could be your MIDI keyboard controller if it's transmitting panning information that would cause it to go all the way over to the left-hand side. And if you wanted to, you know, an easy way to check that is you could go to the MIDI. If you go to the input transformer, come over here and say, let's go, okay, I want to go on a track level, and we'll test it. And then let's open up the panel, and we can say, okay, I want to come over here. We're going to filter, and we'll say type is equal to a MIDI controller. Insert value 1 is 10. So once this is activated, that will filter out all the panning information that's coming in from your controller. So, and then you could filter out the MIDI CC10, which is MIDI panning, and see if that's the issue. So good catch on that. So if your keyboard controller is transmitting it, then Cubase will accept it. So. All right, so we see, wonderful to see Spike Williams on. I was thinking of you yesterday. I was just had lunch with an old friend, and his daughter is living in Wales, not about an hour and a half out from Liverpool. So thinking of you. All right, so Patrick asks, Greg, when I refer something on YouTube or on internet saying 500 hertz to 2K is mid-range, so I'm saying 250 to 5K is mid-range, even different charts telling differently which chart is correct. You know, I would just kind of think of, if I had to kind of look at it visually in my EQ, you know, I would probably just say, okay, you know, I would say that probably here, like I would probably go with 2K is probably more high end. And then I would maybe like, you know, I would say that like from here to here is probably going to be mid-range. So, but you know, I wouldn't worry about which is correct. Just EQ based on what your project needs, and you know, don't have to necessarily worry about what a chart is on, you know, YouTube. All right, so we see from a question from Marcos Castro. So shared copy applies to audio. So it does in a certain circumstance. So with audio, we have events, and then we also have parts. So it does for parts. So we'll show you how this could work. All All right, so let's say I have this this audio here, and I want to be able to do kind of shared copy on like this drum loop. So as we look at it here, all right, so I'm going to, so a lot of times people will come over here, hold down the shift key and go, oh, I don't see like the little equal sign indicating in the upper right hand corner, indicating that it is a shared copy. But if we do this and I go to my audio menu and I say event to part. So now that it's a part, I can copy this out. We'll see the equal sign. That is indicating that it is a shared copy. And if I now duplicate or I go into the first one, I want to do a fade in and a fade out. I want to adjust. I want to come over here within the part editor and get rid of, a particular section. I can now see that those edits are applied to all of the different parts. So you would need to take it to convert the event into a part, and then the edits that you do there can be utilized in like a shared copy for shared copies. All right, so we see from Paul Claridge, Greg, I have over 60 projects on my external hard drive. I want to move them, but so far the only way I see to open everyone and do a backup. If I don't, files go missing. There must be a better way. So, if your file management, like when you started a project and all of your files were placed, into the project folder, you defined the files and you had a particular and let's say there's a preference setting for this as well. So, and we go to editing to audio, that when on import audio files, if we have that automatically go into the project folder, and at that point, any file that you've recorded is placed into that project folder, you don't need to do a project backup. When you need to do a project backup is when your files in a project are in multiple sources or destinations. At that point, that's when you need to do a backup, or another alternative is if you go into the pool window, not into Media Bay, but you go into the pool window for the project, you could right click and just say, at this point there is, and you could just do a prepare archive directly from here, and that will move all of the files directly into the current project folder. So if you've been careful with your project management, all you have to do is copy your project folders over to your external drive. If you are a little bit sloppy with it in files, when you move the file over and then you're getting all these messages that these files can't be found, at that point, that's when you have to do a project backup. So think of it as the tax you have to pay if you weren't kind of diligent with your file management initially in Cubase. But if all the files are, in the same folder, which is, how I would always recommend people placing all, each song into its own unique project folder, then it's just literally just dragging it out to your external drive. All right, so we see from Danny Lopez TV, says, thank you for the MIDI monitor explanation. I found that the problem is mixer controllers sending random panning stuff. Yeah, it's always fun when stuff is just kind of randomly sent out like that. All right, can you please show a demo of using SpectralLayers to clean up many noisy dialogue via ARA? Is it possible to apply the same process to multiple AR clips, or is it best to use direct offline processing? All right. So let me just, I think I have kind of a noisy file that we could use. Just do new project. Thank you for all the wonderful questions from everyone. And if you've learned a new tip or trick, make sure that you do hit the like button, and so it allows us to continue to do these live streams. Okay, so let me just, I'm going to bounce these to create separate files quickly. Okay, so let's say we're listening to this. We have kind of a noisy file, and these are 4 separate instances of it. So I'm going to actually just do it on the track level. So I'll come over here, SpectralLayers. All right. And let's just say I want to just quickly, I'll just do, let's say that's my noise floor. So I will come over here to noise reduction. Let's register, let's say that noise. And I want to, at this point, just do noise reduction. We'll apply it. And this is just quick, dirty for demonstration purposes. You can dial it in very well. So as soon as we come over here, okay, so now I select this, we could hit apply. And let's say if I select those 2 together, so we could just kind of do everything on one particular track and apply it to the different clips. And I think if we wanted to, let's say if I copied this again, all right, and I'll just bounce this one more time. There's the add. So let's say I'm here. Now I want to add an event that I think we could just select. So you could always just come over here and click on the add event or remove event. So, and then you could just choose to do the processing here. So I think, you know, that, so once that's done, we could now come over here and we could, you know, make it all So we can kind of keep the same settings and apply to multiple events on a track. We can make it permanent or just remove the extensions like that. All right, so we see question, how about accessibility for blind users? So we do have a lot of blind users, Stevie Wonder being included, that use Cubase without issues. So like my friend Greg Lukens is probably like one of the smartest people I know. He's a blind mastering engineer, audio genius, dear friend of mine. He's able to run Cubase, Nuendo, Wavelab, all blind without any issues. All right, so we see from PZ136 update my UR824. Steinberg wrote to apologizing, taking 3 months to answer my ticket. Still not working properly. Using Cubase 11 for the last 3 months. So if you want to email me again, I could maybe follow up on it. I don't have one, and realize that still our office, a lot of people are working remotely, so they may not have access to all the hardware as if they were still working in the office. So, but if you want to email me at clubcubase@steinberg.de, I could see if I can follow up if you have, and send your email address that you sent it from. All right, so we see from the Heartbreak Time Machine that mixed snapshots aren't in the artist version, so thanks for the clarification. All right. You see Heartbreak Time Machine says, I guess he's upgrading to Pro this week. So if you could wait a couple weeks, it might be worth your while. So. All right, so we see a question. Hi, I'm using Cubase Essential, I guess probably Elements 11. I don't know how I can edit an audio recording to match the perfect tempo. Sometimes the note I played is a little late, etc. No audio warp in the Elements version. So I think one of the things you could do if you have Cubase Elements is use kind of the beat calculator. So, a lot of times it may be just, coming over here, in Cubase Elements, and manually just splitting and moving different elements to be in time. There's obviously a lot of more, like if you get into the bigger versions of Cubase, but you could split any particular audio and move it freely. It may not be as elegant as what we could do with audio warping, but you could take any audio and freely move it. So maybe play around with that. All right, so we have a question from Sam Brown who asked, version 11 and version 12 seem to have audio processing peaking at random times, high-end powerful PC regardless of ASIO buffer time. Is there any known issue and fix? Thanks. And ASIO guard is set to the highest. So check to see, there's a utility from Resplendence called Latency Mon. So sometimes what could be causing it is just like, in a network driver, a video display driver that just kind of goes out and pings the system. And that could cause like a little CPU spike. So there's a lot of different components that, when we're dealing with audio, and we could think of it as audio real-time performance, not necessarily what we see in CPU performance. But if stuff gets interrupted, if a video card is going out looking for something and that interrupts the audio, you may see a particular CPU spike. I was having lunch with a friend yesterday, and he noticed when he does a lot of live concert recordings at his, he has a very professional studio in Richmond, and he's doing kind of a whole live concert series. And he noticed that particular plugins on his input chain that he was using for recording. I think it might have been Plugin Alliance, that every time he used one of those systems and he kind of figured out that it was checking for the licensing, and that would cause a CPU spike and sometimes turn the plugin off during recording. And it was kind of outside of Cubase. And he found out that once he stopped using those particular plugins, I'm not sure which, I think it might have been Plugin Alliance, but not positive. But that was causing problems on his system. And he stopped using those plugins, and then everything has been solid. So there's a lot of other factors. If it's a hardware-based solution, there's, on Windows, so you say you have a powerful PC, check out, there's a utility called Latency Mon, and I'm sure that, Resplendence has a little utility that could point out things that could be interrupting your real-time audio performance. And I see Jazz Dude is kind enough to post a link to that. All right, so we see question, do I always need to have the internet connection to use Cubase 12 to validate my license since there's no dongle anymore? So the only time is when the license is activated, but then after that, you don't need an internet connection. So it's just for the particular activation, there is kind of a long and laborious process. If you need it to do it without an internet connection, it is possible. It's not the friendliest thing, but once it is activated, it doesn't call home. So no, you do not need an internet connection to be always on in the background. All right, wonderful to see Mike Rivera on. Thanks for joining us today. All right, so we see Rob is the 100th like from Tarpon Springs, Florida. All right, so we see from Dennis, when using FabFilter when using FabFilter Pro Q3 on a mono track channel that outputs to a stereo channel, it seems that it's not affecting the track when making EQ moves. Is there a workaround to this, and is this a bug? So I would think, try to see if you have a, I don't have FabFilter plugins, but, if you're able to take your particular EQ, let's say your channel EQ, and hear it. So let's say I have mono sources here. So let's say I want to take my bass and I could hear that. I could hear every plugin that I work with. I want to open up DJ EQ. I want to go to a 31 band EQ. Let's say a 30 band EQ. And let's say frequency. So I would say that if it's not going to be a Cubase problem if you're not hearing it, so maybe it's a design intention of FabFilter, but I would think that you should be able to hear it, so I don't think it's going to be a bug in Cubase because it would be a bug for all EQ plugins. But maybe if someone else has FabFilter, I know it's a popular EQ plugin. All right, so we see how do you load a Groove Agent sample onto a track? So it's not really, so I'm not, let's say, okay, I have Groove Agent instance here, so we'll open it up. So it's not set up where, the intention of Groove Agent is to, place, trigger samples via Midi. not necessarily to take these samples and drop it out of Groove Agent. If you really need it to, you could come over here and say, okay, I want to take this note and I wanted a C1 note. And then I could, let's make sure our velocity is 127, and then I could come over to my render in place. And now I could have a sample. So you could render it out if you needed to. But, you know, again, the design intention is to kind of do the other way around, to take samples and drag them into Groove Agent so that we could play it like that, as opposed to taking the samples out of Groove Agent onto the project window. But let me know if I misunderstood the question. All right, so we see super big question. In Padshop or really any VSTI, what MIDI message do I need to send change patches? So some of the instruments will just respond to MIDI program changes. A lot of VST3 instruments, you know, a lot of times people would send program, you know, the intention of program changes was to send, you know, okay, I want piano here, organ, because we had limited number of tracks, you know, but with the basically, you know, having unlimited tracks, a lot of instruments haven't really implemented program changes. So it is available within the VST3 spec, but a lot of people don't find it necessary to have program changes. Like kind of in old days when you would, you know, spend $3,000 on a keyboard that could play, you know, one MIDI channel at a time, and then you would switch back and forth between different keyboards with program changes. But, you know, once you're in, so, you know, so a lot of instruments don't respond to program changes, which is a little surprising, and Padshop may be one of them. But, you know, if you just kind of come over here, you know, I think you could use like even, so let's say I have this patch loaded up, then even just using like the arrow keys once you have this selected, you know, arrow key, enter, you could switch sounds that way. So, but let's see if we could do quick, because it used to be program changes were also set in to go between 128 sounds, because a lot of instruments didn't have more than 128 sounds. So then, you know, you came up with, if you had more than 128 sounds, you could have different banks, and then you could have 16,000, you know, you could have, you know, 128 times 128, so 16,384, if my math is right, of different program changes. But, you know, so we didn't want the number of program change and bank change messages to be a limiting factor on the number of patches that you can have in your particular instrument as well. All right, so we see from Myron, can you show a complete working example of selecting the highest notes of each chord in a chord progression? All right. Okay, so let me just enter in some chords. Okay, so I'm going to just drag these down. Okay, so let's say we have these chords here. So let's see if we could use a logical editor. Okay, so we want to select type is equal to notes, and I think we'll get a context variable. And we'll say note number and chord, and let's try set this to 3, see if that's the right number. I may have to do 4. Yeah, so just set that to, so you want to go to select, type is equal to note, and then context variable is equal to note number and chord. So I just chose 3 in this example, and that did it. And we'll just look at that one more time. Sorry to dismiss it so quickly. All right, see what our next question is. All right, so we see question from TJ. I get no sound through my monitors when using Cubase. However, I do through my headphones. May I fix this problem? So I don't know if you're going into an audio interface or if you're going directly into... So if it is a built-in audio interface is usually when I get this type of question. And if you go to your studio setup, you'll say audio system. It may say generic low latency audio. Click on it here and go to the control panel. And you may have, and this is different on Mac versus Windows, so you could just kind of disregard this. But there you could, when a headphone is connected, it may automatically... it will probably be a different driver for headphones versus speakers, versus line level output from the same device. So if it's a built-in audio interface, you may have to tell it to, in the control panel, to output the audio going to the speakers as opposed to a headphone connection. So, but if you could let us know what audio interface you're using, that would be helpful as well. Or if you have an audio interface. All right, so we have a question. In T guitar loaded in Hallion 6, I noticed that the patterns option follows the tempo in Cubase. Is there any way to manually set the tempo irrelevant of Cubase? All right, let's see if we can take a look. We should be able to load it in. I'll do it in Hallion as well. I think I have T guitar on. Yeah, it's not necessarily a Steinberg instrument. See if if it shows up in Hallian Sonic. Yeah, I don't think I have it installed on this computer. But if you want to email me, I'll make a point to have it installed for the next live stream. So, but if you want to email me just as a brain cramp reminder, that would be appreciated. But I think most of the time there may be a way to have it not synced. But I'll see if I get it installed for Friday's live stream. All right. So we have a question. What's the best way to make sure that all the audio files needed for the project are in the designated project folder? So, if I come over here, let's say I change, I'll just do a new project here. Okay. So there is a prepare archive function, which will do that. But the first thing is, make sure when you record that all the audio files are actually, designated to go into a folder. So let's say I go to my audio track here, and I'm going to add 2 audio tracks. I'm going to set a different record folder for this one. So we'll set our record folder, and I'll put it to my desktop. Okay, so I'll enable both these, and then I'll record. Okay, so now we go to our pool. And we could so we'll go to media and we'll look at our pool window, and we can see that as we probably slide over, these will be in different locations. So our project folder is set to this location, but this file isn't. So I'm going to right click and prepare archive. It'll say external files will be copied into the working directory. Proceed. All right. And pool is ready for archive. So now audio 02 is now automatically been copied and moved over to the same project folder. So just come right over here and go to the pool window under media, right click and choose prepare archive. And if you have files that are kind of scattered around, that will then place those particular files into the project folder. All right. So we see from Got since you asked about the dongle, this is a question that raises a question for me. Is everything now able to be run without the dongle, like Padshop, Groove Agent, Hallian, etc.? Anybody know? So currently, Hallian and Hallian Sonic and some of their instruments are not on the new licensing system, but they should be soon. So look for that soon. I can't really give more information, but probably that will be like the last big batch that will be coming. But Groove Agent, Padshop, Hallian, VST Live, Wavelab, Dorco, SpectralLayers, and many other instruments have already kind of migrated to Grand, Backbone, have migrated to the new licensing system. All right, so we see a question. If I draw a 2-bar box in the arranger track, then I try to draw 1 bar within the first, I can't start from bar 1. I have to draw from right to left, then drag it inside the first. All right, so let's take a look. So I'm going to add an arranger track. All right, so I'm gonna just go ahead and draw in, let's say, a 5 measure part. Okay, so that's A. And let's say I want to draw in B. So you may not see it, but if we look at it here, and if I wanted to draw in C, it may just be behind. So we can see that when I select C here, we can see like the start and end time. And when I click on B, I can make this, we see that it's a little shorter than a bar. I don't have snap turned on. But it may just be kind of behind, so it may not be. But if you just kind of select the different events here, we could see that you could have the 1 measure part. So let's say, so we have A in, and I now have snap turned on. So I'm going to draw in event B. So it is there. It's just kind of behind A. So if I do, event C, I could draw, so we could just kind of continue to draw in events kind of over top. So it looks like it works, but it may not be so apparent because it could be just behind the original event. Great. All right, wonderful to see Grant Nicholas on the live stream. Wonderful producer, musician, engineer. Hope you're doing well. All right, my Cubase, my chat field just jumped on me, so let me just try to find my spot. All right, so we see a question from Billy. I have Cubase 12. What's the best way to export stems of a song with VST instruments and effects with group channels plus effects buses for tweaking in without losing your effects levels, etc.? All right, so let me come over here. Okay, so I think I have an example for this. Okay, so now let's say I have all right, so let's say I'll just turn this down. All right, so here I have like my guitar group. All right, I have a drum group. So what would happen before is when we would do, in previous versions to Cubase, when I came over here, if I rendered just like the if you had the same reverb on different groups, we would often hear kind of a bleed. So it could be something kind of like this. So what would happen in previous versions if they were sharing the same effect send, and I exported the drums, and the reverb was also going to the guitars, the reverb from the guitar would bleed into my drum export, which isn't what we wanted to do. So right now I have the guitar group, and we have just too much reverb here, and this isn't routed to the group. This reverb is being routed to the stereo output. So now what I want to do is come over here and let's export, and I'm going to export just the particular guitar group. So we'll do our export audio mixdown. Okay, so at this point, I just wanted to export. I think this is the right. Okay, so I'm going to export the guitar group, and then we could choose to have this automatically include our groups and sends, and we could include master effects as well. And then we're going to create an audio track on it. Let's change the naming scheme here. All right, so now when I listen to I don't hear the drums that were feeding into the same effect. It's just only for this particular group, it's now kind of bypassed the particular other channels that were feeding the group. And now I only have the effects that are on that group and are not affected by effects that are going into the same effect sends. So, and that was one of the changes that they made in the batch export in Cubase 12, so that your reverb from other sources weren't being applied into your particular mixdown. So that's how you could do it. See, Gareth is just indicating he's never had any issues with FabFilter Q3 and Cubase. So thanks for sharing your experience, Gareth. All right, so we have Jeff Baggett and Kyle Barton saying hello. Thanks for being on. All right, so we see from Clayton Workman says it's amazing that you do these so often and for so long. For each session, no other DAW software has anything close to this level of customer support and help. So it gives me something to do during COVID when I wasn't traveling. So, but now I could reach 12,000 people a week on live streams and videos. So it's working out really well. But I'm glad to be able to help people. So I just see from Sound Foundry Studios, just getting into CV from Cubase to external hardware synths, maybe a brief touch on that topic. So yeah, I think one of the things, and I think Jazz Dude just mentioned this, make sure you have an audio interface that has the DC coupled outputs on it. You see you have the Lynx Aurora. So I think some of the more modern Motu stuff, I'm not sure if the Lynx Aurora is DC coupled or not, but you could check with the Lynx to make sure. But I haven't really experimented or played around so much with CV stuff myself. I should probably get one just to kind of familiarize myself. All right, wonderful to see Jay from Secret Studios. I'm glad you can be here, and it's great to see you on the Zoom meetup with Michael Wagner last time. Okay, reading through comments. All right, wonderful to see Mike Graham Witcher on. Hope you're settled into your new place. You have your studio set up. All right, so we see a question from Jay. His question is there a way to either with Project Logical Editor or Project Logical Editor in conjunction with Keyboard Maestro to be able to set a target level and to set either RMS or LUFS 3 stage audio to target? So probably what you could do is just come over to, let's say if we go to your direct offline processing. So let's say I just want to come over to, let's go to your direct offline processing. And then you could actually probably just save. So I'm going to select an audio event here so we can do offline processing to something. So let's say I wanted to go to my normalize and let's set it to -14 LUFS. All right, so let's say I want that set. Then let's come over here and I'm just going to put this in preset bank 3. All right, and we'll say normalize -14 LUFS. Okay, and let's see, I think we could even maybe call this out from a keyboard shortcut. So let's go to key commands, to direct offline processing. So let's say if we save it as favorite one, that you could now just, I think if we save that, just yeah, so you could then just simply save that as a preset for the direct offline processing, and I think that will get you the same thing, probably maybe even a little bit easier, Jay. All right. All All right, so we see, hi Greg, is it possible to make a macro to change main output in audio connections window? I want to be able to flip between my quad as main out and stereo in audio connections window, or am I being lazy? So I don't know a way to kind of automatically flip it. So let's say if we come over here to our outputs to make it main. So, but I don't know, if you need it to be main or if you just want to be able to switch between those, if we have this set up as your monitors, we could have monitor 1 be stereo and monitor 2 be quad, monitor 3 be 5.1, and then you could just, switch between your different monitor sources here. So let me know if you specifically need it to be the main, or if you just wanted to easily switch back and forth between quad and stereo. Like in my system, I have it set up for stereo 5.1. I have my left and right of my 5.1, like a smaller, and then I have just my center channel for mono, and I go back and forth between these particular configurations just using the control room outputs. So let me know if you need it to be a main mix or you just wanted to easily switch back and forth between quad and stereo. And great to see you on, Nick. Hope you're doing well. All right. All right, so we see from Soren, he asked, I want to ask about the fact that you pass along some things to Steinberg. Can you tell us more about your contact with Steinberg office? Is it much? Is it stressed short? Do you just call? So, periodically we do have meetings. We'll do like a Microsoft Teams meeting, which is kind of like a business version of Zoom. But yeah, I'm in pretty regular contact. Every question that's asked in a live stream, I send a report to the office, but a couple times a month, we'll reach out, like, we're doing some planning for the upcoming NAMM show, and then we'll just talk about other things as well. So there's different ways of, different reports and different functions. So I think I'm having a meeting with some of the guys from Steinberg, with an artist on Thursday, for instance. So, but we'll always try to make time to get together, go over product stuff as well. But sometimes I'm meeting with people that aren't necessarily the product people, maybe meeting with marketing people or meeting with distribution people as well. But they're always really pleasant meetings, and always look forward to them. Been friends with many people at Steinberg. Steinberg's one of the few companies I'm approaching my 31st year in April, and there's 6 or 7, maybe 10 people that have been at Steinberg longer than I've been. So. Gareth doesn't like when I played his intentionally messed up guitar part. So in that project. Gareth worked hard and diligently to make mistakes that were good for demonstration purposes for me. I appreciate it. All right, we see Michael Teams' computer has been, it looks like Michael Teams' computer his blue screen of death problem is resolved with new RAM with the help of Jazz Dudes. That's great. All right, so we have a question, having a brain cramp. How to send an instrument track to an audio track? All right, so let's say, so we could do it via a group. Is kind of an easy way of doing it. So let's say we'll open this project here. All right, so let's say I just want to take the bass part, and let's say as we're so if I have it just on an instrument track, I'm just going to come over here. I'll add a group channel. And now what I want to do is just add an audio track, and I'll set the group as the input. So we'll say our audio inputs is from my bass group. I'll add the track. Then if I just hit record on the audio track, so just send it to a group. You can send it to an output, doesn't have to be connected anywhere, and then just simply take that group as the audio input for an audio track, and then you could just record it as audio like that. All right, reading through comments here. All right, so we see question, I import video at 59.94 frames per second and change the project frames per second to match it, 30 to 59.94. For the video hangs up, I then switch project frames per second back to 30. The video plays, but the video and audio don't sync. All right, so are you absolutely sure, this is from Musical PT, are you absolutely sure that the video is at 59.94? It's most video isn't at that particular frame rate. But the one thing I would do just to make sure, sometimes, you may get like a frame rate in the name, but it could not actually be the frame rate of the video. But when you go to the project setup, so I'm not sure if you're changing this, but try using the get frame rate from video and make sure that the actual video is set to 59.94. So try just the get frame rate from videos as opposed. So I'm not sure if you use that or you just manually matched it there, but that may give you a better indication of what the actual frame rate is. All right, so you see Nick is just saying he's using using it for printing. So one way you might be able to do something, Nick, is also, so let's say there's two approaches. One may be just to, if you're using it for just printing, like let's say we're over here, so you could try this, two approaches. So let's say I'm going to add a group channel. I'll just add group channels independently. So let's say, okay, I want a stereo group and I want to add another group. And we'll make this a quad. Okay, and then let's say if we go into our direct routing, so, and we could, in the mixer, we could do direct routing summing mode on. So, but now what we could do is just select a bunch of tracks, send it to the stereo out group, and simultaneously, so let's say I want to send it to, I'll just select all these tracks here, and I'm going to send all these to group 1, which is stereo, and then I can send all of these to group 2, and that could be quad. So we could send it to two destinations using the direct routing. So that might work. There's also, if I wanted to take a bunch of tracks, we could go into the project logical editor. So let's go to the project logical editor, and we could say transform. We want to take media, we'll say container type is track, and we could say, so let's say our tracks, and we could say, I think, go to track operation. We could say connect output. So at this point, I could just say, let's connect it to our quad output if we wanted to, or to our quad group. So now we say, okay, all these are going to group 1. I can now just send it all of the destinations, all the tracks in the project to group 2. So, or just switch it to your main and in the audio outputs, but I don't think there's a way I know of with a keyboard shortcut to do that. See, Gareth says Greg is Steinberg. And there's a lot of really smart people in Germany that work really hard to make all this magic happen that makes me look smart, and so all the people that actually create the program and plan all the stuff, they deserve all the credit. Okay, we see Jeff Sabelski on. He's whacker number 127. See, Soren just says, I know Steinberg listens, whereas I was a skeptic and thought that Steinberg just listens to top dog users of Cubase, but getting Greg to pass along info about a bug, a patch later, it was fixed. So, all right. So wonderful to see Shane Adams on. Wonderful songwriter in Nashville. So glad you can make it, from Artist Accelerator. So we see a question, says, Greg, do you know the survey for Cubase results? Have you been part of going through the survey result? I would sure like to see what everyone have said, considering Steinberg listens. So that's all kind of handled at Steinberg. I imagine some of that information would be, pretty confidential, and only certain teams would be seeing it. And since they know I talk to like 10,000 people a week, that they probably will. So I haven't really seen that, but that would be kind of more of an internal thing. And even though I could be perceived as Steinberg, I technically don't work for Steinberg. I just work for the U.S. distributor. So I would love to work directly for Steinberg. But so sometimes those little internal meetings I'm not privy of or a part of. So. All right, so you see from Shannon Adams, did you get my sent question? You may have answered it already. So I'm just about ready to jump to user questions. So, but I'm not sure if you sent it before or after the live, stream started. So let me jump to some of the questions that were mailed in. All right, so we had a question about how to slice, dice, and chop up a loop in Groove Agent. Okay, so let me just... All right, I'll just open up a different project here. Okay, so there's lots of great manipulation that you could do inside of Groove Agent. So let's say I have an empty slate here on Groove Agent, and I have kind of generic drum loop here. All right, and I want to do some manipulation on this, so I'm going to drag it, let's say, to an instrument pad. And then as I do this, I'm just going to go to the Slice tab, and we'll create slices. So now each of these slices has automatically been placed onto its own pad. And it's created a pattern. So if I wanted to play this pattern, so now as I just play this pattern, if I want to do manipulation, so let's say I want to take this snare and go to pitch, I can say, okay, let's tune that snare up a little bit. And let's tune this snare down a little bit. And let's say I want this pitch to be random on the third snare. So we could now just kind of, again, come over here and just be able to do this type of manipulation and say, I want to take this hi-hat and reverse it. So I'll just come right over here. Let's say, okay, let's go to sample. So I'm going to take now, as soon as I have dragged, we've created our pattern, and now I could choose to drag this particular pattern to my project and just drop it kind of right onto the grid. So we'll just say, okay, I want this starting right at the measure. I will make some copies of that. But let's say in these particular notes, I want to select all the notes. Let's come over and I'll go to my Midi. Let's go to functions. Let's reverse the particular notes. I wanted to take this batch and automatically just randomly select using my arrow keys. Scientifically, of course. Sorry. So at this point, we could now just kind of play that one drum loop that was playing the same kind of thing. We flip it around and have it random but the same sounds. So that way, it's kind of an easy way to kind of take a drum loop, slice it up, dice it, chop it, do all sorts of fun things. So it's not only limited to drum loops, but vocals, all sorts of great stuff that you could do using kind of this slicing functionality inside of Groove Agent. Okay, so let's look at another question. All right, so we see, Dear Greg, I know that it's possible to record the drum pads and the keys of the Groove Agent GUI to Cubase. Is it also possible to record the chord pads and the keys of the GUI of Halion Sonic SE? So the when we look at the particular sounds here for Halion Sonic SE, so let's say we go to our Halion Sonic SE, these aren't really set up to be like a particular to transmit Midi. So these are really just kind of for auditioning and making sure that the you have established Midi communications. But if you really want it to, play, from, instead of like clicking here, you could go to, if you hit Alt or Option plus the letter K, you could just come over here, and if you hit record, you can now just like you would. And you could play, if you wanted to play multiple notes, you could use your computer keyboard. So I'm just hitting like Q, E, T, W, R, Y. You could then spell check your Midi, like quantizing, just kidding. So that's one way of doing it. Another way is if you are in the editor. So say you hit record. You could come right over here. So you can record directly within the editor as well. So just by hitting the keys. So at that point, you could just see whatever information that you wanted. So, so you could hit the keys. So not directly from Halion Sonic SE, the keyboard there. That's really kind of internal auditioning as opposed to other functions there. All right, so John Costigan had sent a question in about reamping. So he has a 2-in, 4-out UAD Apollo twin interface and needs a bit of coaching on best practices. So I guess it's the DI source track is good and clean, but I need some pointers on sending it out to get reamped back into the interface with an understanding of any possible latency. Thanks for all your help and coaching. So, really to do this is, just, and there's the one thing that, could be tricky is sometimes the impedance going into the guitar amp, but it's really, so you may have to be careful with levels, but if you have a dry guitar, and I think I have a example here that I can open up. So let's come over here. So let's say we have a guitar amp with a microphone, all right? So let's take, all right, so say I want to solo this, and we just adjust kind of the panning, and just turn off the automation. All right, so let's say, so like this, if we wanted to bypass our inserts, So that's our guitar. So what I would probably do is send this to, I would create an output here on your audio connections and probably just a mono output source. So let's go to our outputs. We'll add a mono bus. And we could call this, 2 amp or reamp. All right, and what we want to do is take this particular guitar and we're going to send this guitar out to the reamp. So that's going to send it out, and as we do this, we'll look at our output. So we want to say, okay, this is going out of output 3 of our audio interface, output 4, whatever, just as long as you know which output. Take that cable from your audio interface, feed it into the input of the amplifier, connect a microphone to the amplifier, take the microphone signal and feed it back. And at that point, add an audio track to that particular mic. Now, this should be pretty latency free because it's going to play back and be compensated for latency. So really kind of the only latency that's going to be added is what a guitar going into a guitar amp would generate. So, record the reamp guitar signal as an audio track. And then, if you see that while you're here, if you're like, oh, for some reason, my monitoring software is, you could take these 2 different sources. So let's say this one is, starting off, slightly earlier in time, and this is a great case where, okay, I want to take these 2 sources and use the audio alignment panel and say, okay, I want rhythm guitar, and then I want this, we're going to click here and say, the reamp guitar. So at that point, you could then just choose to align the signals, or, if it's going to be off, it's going to be the same amount off. Just kind of zoom in and just kind of nudge the events over. But it's pretty straightforward, I think you'll find, John. So you look through all 24,000 questions on Cubase Index, and there's no reamping. So that is now solved. Okay, so we got a question that was sent in from about kind of matching up the guitar, matching up drums or pre-recorded instruments, and we covered that earlier. All right, so we have a question. It says, I have a 4-bar bridge in Cubase, and say I have a 16-step sequence on a Prophet 6, which is clock synced via USB. The sequence is just on the synth, not written in via piano roll. Next, I'd like to refine the synth sound while the bridge cycles. So I command around 4 bars of the bridge, select loop, and hit the space bar. All begins while the Prophet obeys and then is chugging along in sync until the back end of the 4 bars. At that point, the DAW loops and the Prophet stops. Why is that? It happens to a bunch of my other hardware synths in Cubase. Essentially, I'm asking Cubase to do is continually send clock. It shouldn't make a difference to the synths whether the timeline is scrolling endlessly to the right, which works fine, or simply looping on the grid. The hardware synths should just keep chugging along in time. So a lot of hardware synths don't necessarily like to go backwards, sometimes with MIDI clock sync. So, but there are a couple things. And I dug out my old Alesis HR16, which I haven't turned on in decades, but it looks like I need to replace the battery on it to test this. But if we go to the project synchronization setup, make sure like when we go to your destinations under MIDI clock that you always, that you have MIDI clock follows project position. So make sure that is checked. And, there's always, and you could try toggling these 2 things. I don't have anything else to test, but I know over years of experience that some things respond well to MIDI clock and some don't. So it could be that if your device isn't responding and looping back, that it's not designed to do that. So some just think it's going to be playing for forward forever. So you could check that. I'll see if I could borrow something that has like an internal sequencer from someone. I have a lot of external gear, but I always did my sequencing in Cubase. So, or see if I could get, I was even right before the live stream looking at what it takes to replace the battery in an HR16. So I would have to do some soldering and stuff. But check to make sure that these MIDI clock preferences are set. And if you see that with all devices or just your Prophet, then that may indicate that it is going to, that it's not being able to receive. But it should, Cubase is probably, I'm sure, sending the clock in a loop, but not all devices, and I've seen this over the years many times, like to go backwards. All right, so Benny had asked, I have a Keylab 49, let's see, and a QCon MIDI controller I've set up so that I can control the volume in a control room with the Keylab, but every time I open a new project, I have to change from QCon to Keylab in MIDI settings. Is it possible to set so Keylab is always active so I don't have to change every time? Hope you understand what I mean. So, if I go to, let's say I will go to so I'm not sure if you're doing this, Benny, from Midi Remote. You may have sent an email during the live stream, but let's say if I come over to my Midi Remote, and let me just set up a quick layer up like that and see if we could get it. So I'm just going to set up in a MIDI remote, and I think that the MIDI remote will be kind of project agnostic. So you could switch projects, and the MIDI remote will still stay. Just get this project open here. So I'm going to go to MIDI remote. All right, so I'm going to take this particular control here, and let's just go to my control room volume. So pick up, then I'll apply mapping. All right, so now this knob is my control room volume, and if I do a new project, and as long as it's still connected, so I'll do a new project, looks like, all right, let me set up this knob for, all right, and let me just try one more new project, see if it's still, that carries over, or if it has to be reset. So I think that this would stick, but you could probably also set it maybe in the generic remote. So, and see if you could set up, within the generic remote to do it. And that should be kind of project agnostic, but you may send an email because I'm not sure if you were doing it in the MIDI remote or not. All right, I think I got a couple questions that were mailed in maybe. Let's see if I could catch those real quick. Okay, good. Okay, just looking. All right, so I'll play with that bending and see if I get that to stick, but I thought that that would kind of persist. But let me just jump back to live questions. So Shane, I'm not sure if I got the email. So maybe if you could just remind me what your question was, Shane, if I didn't answer it. All right. All right, so you see question, how to speed up chopped audio to 2 times, 4 times. All right, so let's say if we have, let me just go over here. So let's say if, I'm not sure if you're chopping it, different rates, or if you just want to, so let's say I'll send my guitars to a group here. All right, so let's say now both guitars will be processed here. So I'm going to go on this. So if you wanted to just create like a chopped sound, we can go to like inserts and go to like loop mash FX. So if I just want to take my 2 guitars. So that way you could, take like, different elements. Let's say, if you want to take like all the guitar parts and, run it through here, you could do kind of real-time chopping like that. If you're manually cutting it, you could just change, as you hold down, if I come here and say, okay, now I hold down the Alter Option key, we could cut. Or if I come here and say, okay, I want to cut and change the frequency of that, I could just say, so you could do different chop amounts there and you could have that aligned to the grid. All right, so we see John Koskikin about the reamp question. Says he has the line level matching transform in a line, so no worries about that. So yeah, I think you should be fine, especially just doing the alignment if necessary, but I don't even think you'd have to do that. All right, so we have a question. Would like to know how to use Midi track on Cubase. It's used for external instruments or as send effect. So Midi tracks can be sent, Midi tracks are, instrument tracks are sent to internal virtual instruments and they kind of correlate, the audio properties of a particular channel so that, it's automatically when you hit the edit channel button, because a MIDI track itself doesn't have audio, but, it's because it's often going out to an external device. You could have a MIDI track that's routed to a VST instrument, but it's more direct to just do it with an instrument track. So that's the intention of MIDI tracks, and not necessarily to like a send effect, but sometimes people may send program changes to guitar processors to change, like at this point in a song, go to this preset, go to this preset at this part of the song, so you don't have to worry about hitting 16 buttons with your feet to change your sounds. So you could have stuff like that done through a MIDI track as well. Okay, so we see Michael Pierce is done with his guitar, tambourine, and bass editing. All right, we see Nick is sneaking out 10 minutes early. So we'll see you hopefully on Friday. Thanks for joining us. So we see Michael Pierce has 134 likes, so thank you so much. All right. All right, so I think I'm at the end of questions. Let's see if there's any other questions that come in. Otherwise, we'll wrap up about 5 minutes early. Thanks for all the great questions. I hope that everyone has learned a new tip or trick. And we'll be doing this again on Friday, starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern. So if you like this, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, that you actually, hit the like button. That enables us to continue to offer this as a service, and let your friends know. Invite people who, maybe don't have this service for their DAW. If you want to, show them what we're doing in the Steinberg community, you could show that. All right, so Jazz Dude's his last chance to hit like. All right, and you see I get a trophy from Agent K, so I feel like I did my job well if I get a trophy from Agent K. So we'll see if there's any more questions that sneak in. If not, we'll wrap up just a couple minutes early. All right. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up and look forward to seeing everyone back on Friday. Have a wonderful week, and we'll be back. And again, send questions to clubcubase@steinberg.de, or send them to, or just ask them and get them ready for the next live stream. Thank you so much, and take care, and we'll be back on Friday.